Who said you could sit? I'm sorry, everyone. Such a clueless and embarrassing daughter-in-law. My mother-in-law, who had just tripped me by kicking my leg, was now acting all sweet and smiley to the relatives around her. People nearby offered their hands to help me up, but my mother-in-law stopped them. I gritted my teeth, holding on to my aching left leg. It's still slightly swollen, but that's the spot I fractured just a month ago. My mother-in-law was flaunting around the relatives, acting like she could treat me, her daughter-in-law, like a mere servant. But then, someone appeared, and just like that, mother-in-law reputation crumbled. My name is Jennifer. I'm 24 this year, and I live with my husband. We both work full-time. I met my husband at a matchmaking event organized by a friend. Back then, I thought the idea of getting married was silly, and I was too shy to even consider dating someone. Plus, I was always so focused on my studies that I didn't have many friends. Because of my personality, a few of my close friends worried that I might end up single and with few friends for the rest of my life. So, they strongly insisted and brought me to the event. I wasn't looking for a life partner, but by chance, I met Ken, who's 2 years older than me. He turned out to be a senior colleague of the friend who had invited me. Apparently, Ken was also one of those who got dragged into attending the event. My friend whispered to me, "If you don't find anyone else you like, just chat with this guy," so I did just that. It seems Ken too felt the same way. I later found out he said he'd be with me only if there weren't any other women he liked. In the end, I did attend an event for singles, but later on, I ended up dating Ken, just as my friend had suggested. According to my friend, Ken and I seemed to have similar vibes, so they thought we might be a good match, and it turned out they were right. While we weren't exactly finishing each other's sentences, there were times I knew what Ken was thinking or trying to say, and it seemed he felt the same way about me. We had a comfortable, friendly relationship despite being a couple and eventually got married quite naturally. Up to this point, everything had been smooth, and I was surprised that someone like me, who isn't really good at socializing, got married. But then, hell began. Ken's family home was about as far as taking a high-speed train from my hometown, say, like traveling from New York to Chicago. I moved in with my in-laws as soon as we got married. Now, living with in-laws might conjure up images of nasty mother-in-law drama for some. In my case, I thought Ken's parents might be as laid-back as Ken himself. But the moment I stepped into their house, an older woman said to me, "You're Jennifer? What's with that messy hair?" Before I could say anything, an older woman said that to me, leaving me stunned. I realized she was Ken's mom because her crescent-shaped eyes when she smiled looked just like his. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I hope you'll like this." Trying to hide my unease, I handed over a gift box that was in a paper bag. Without reaching for it, my mother-in-law said, "I'm busy, so get ready and come to the kitchen right away. You can unpack later." And then she just disappeared into a room. My father-in-law, who had been silent the whole time, was the one who took the gift. However, he didn't make eye contact with me and mumbled something under his breath as he walked in a different direction from my mother-in-law. Meanwhile, Ken just went inside without a word of explanation or apology. I felt uneasy about the family dynamics I had glimpsed in that brief moment, but I didn't have time to hesitate. As my mother-in-law had told me, I handed my luggage over to Ken and quickly headed for the kitchen. Hearing my footsteps, my mother-in-law turned around and gave me a sharp glare. "Do you not tie your hair back when you cook at home? Do you have some tradition where a husband drinks a tea made from his wife's hair or something?" Seems she purposely described my naturally curly hair as messy earlier. I wasn't expecting to start cooking as soon as I arrived, and it appeared she didn't like that I had my hair half up. "I'm sorry. I'll tie it back and come right back." As I was about to leave the kitchen, she said, "Don't you dare drop even a strand of your uncultured hair. And if you're gonna tie it, these hold the best," handing me a pile of rubber bands. I was somewhat prepared to be bullied as the new daughter-in-law, but I hadn't expected such direct animosity. My mother-in-law was a tricky person to deal with. Most would assume mothers bully their daughters-in-law because they feel their precious son has been taken away, but it didn't seem that way with her. That's because she was tough on Ken and my father-in-law as well. Especially towards Ken, she'd often say, you're so weak-willed that you could only get a good-for-nothing wife like her, or despite me constantly telling you not to turn out like your dad. She was really mean with her words. Ken and my father-in-law just kept quiet, not retaliating at all. I decided that she must have some sort of condition where mother-in-law can't survive without making snide remarks. I managed to endure that. However, there were times when mother-in-law was in an especially bad mood and only my meal wouldn't be served. Ken and my father-in-law saw this, but both pretended not to notice. Ken, in an attempt to appease her, would even join in on her nasty remarks about me. Despite being a grown man, he didn't have the guts to speak up to his mother. He acted as if everything his mom said was right, blaming me for it. It made me sad, and at the same time, I was utterly dumbfounded by his attitude. As for my father-in-law during these times, he would be as inconspicuous as possible, quickly leaving the room whenever my mother-in-law started harping on me. The reason not only Ken but also my father-in-law couldn't stand up to her became evident through her harsh words. "You married into our family, so you have no right to talk back to me. Everything you have now is thanks to my father. If you have any complaints, why don't you speak up? You'd be cursed by my father." It didn't seem like the father-in-law was afraid of being cursed, but he seemed to feel inferior because he married into the family. Having seen his father being submissive to his mother since he was young, Ken probably realized that his mother was the strongest in the family. Just like his father, he always tried to gauge his mother's mood and would either stay silent or agree with her, no matter what she said. I, already anxious about living in my in-laws' house, was soon faced with a predicament. From the day we started living together, I was made to accompany my mother-in-law on her weekly grocery and household shopping trips. One day, after getting used to carrying bags full in both hands, I went to the usual supermarket that my mother-in-law always frequents. It was a weekend, so the elevator we usually took was crowded, and we couldn't use it right away. Impatient, my mother-in-law quickly grew frustrated that there wasn't a single elevator on the ground floor, exclaiming, "Forget it. It's a waste of time to wait here. Let's just use the stairs." Though she always has me fetch even just a single TV remote for her, it was surprising to hear such words from my mother-in-law. If I dared to speak out, I felt like she might just bite my head off, so I silently obeyed. Walking diagonally behind my fast-paced mother-in-law, I reached out instinctively when she almost tripped over the hem of her dress. In that split second, I stretched out my hand and supported her back to prevent her from falling. But in doing so, I lost my balance and ended up tumbling down a few steps. Until then, everything had been okay. However, because of what I did, I neglected to watch my own step. I lost my balance and fell. "Hey! What the heck are you doing?" Instead of showing concern, my mother-in-law scolded me. Oddly enough, I was more surprised by her reaction than the pain I felt. I'd only fallen down a few steps, but it seemed like I'd twisted my ankle pretty badly. Noticing the rapidly swelling ankle, my mother-in-law clicked her tongue in annoyance. "Ugh, you're so clumsy. With that ankle, you won't be able to carry the groceries properly. Just wait in the car. It's pointless having you here." I don't want to sound ungrateful, but it's pretty harsh considering I got hurt while trying to help my mother-in-law. But if I mentioned that, she'd probably snap at me even more, so I just quietly went back to the car, reclined the seat, and took a rest. The next day, once the household chores had settled down, I went to the doctor around noon. I thought it was just a sprain, but it turned out I had a hairline fracture, and they gave me crutches for the way home. I texted mother-in-law about it, letting her know I'd gotten medicine and would be a bit late. The lack of a response was par for the course, letting me know mother-in-law didn't care in the slightest. Struggling with crutches I wasn't used to, I got home only to be immediately told by my mother-in-law, "Change the light bulb in the bathroom. The ceiling is high, so just use the ladder from the backyard. And make sure to clean that dirty floor." I was taken aback by her usual uncaring attitude. It wasn't that I wanted her to be concerned for me. But, there's no immediate need to use the bathroom, and couldn't the light bulb replacement wait for Ken or the father-in-law to get back from work? Having someone with a bad leg climb up a ladder on a slippery floor, it showed mother-in-law lack of humanity. And of course, when Ken and father-in-law came home, neither showed any concern. All I got was mother-in-law yelling at me for not doing chores efficiently with my injured foot. From that point, her mistreatment of me intensified. Though she didn't lay a hand on me, I was constantly berated with cruel words, increasing my stress. About a month into this life, while I was weeding the garden, protecting my slowly healing foot, mother-in-law approached me. "There's a family dinner next week. Knowing you, you don't have any formal dresses, right? I'll lend you one of mine, but make sure you fix that messy hair of yours for the day." Ever since the marriage, she had made me quit my job. I had no money of my own, yet mother-in-law never stopped taking digs, even about the texture of my hair. Thanks to her, I was always forced to tie my hair up tightly, making me feel like I was aging even more. Ken said that family dinners are held about once every 3 months, and everyone who gathers there holds a high social status. Whether they're highly educated and employed at major companies, or entrepreneurs with over 500 employees under them, they're all elites in their respective fields, it seems. When I actually went, I noticed that in the parking lot of the reserved restaurant, everyone was standing around in groups, chatting and mingling with those high-status individuals. Even though I was the newbie, many approached me to chat, but my mother-in-law would almost always intervene. "This is my daughter-in-law, Jennifer. Sure, she's dressed up nicely now, but on a regular day, if no one says anything, she'd be in sweatpants with unkempt hair. It seems she put in extra effort today knowing she'd meet all of you. Honestly, it's a bit much, isn't it?" Despite the awkward smiles from others, my mother-in-law kept bad-mouthing me. Some kind person tried to divert the conversation, but my husband, Ken, either stayed silent or just nodded along to whatever his mom said. The mother-in-law sweet-talked everyone in a cloying tone and even handed out small gifts to each person. When we finally entered the restaurant, the seating arrangement seemed to be decided by some unspoken rules. I was about to take a seat following Ken, but my mother-in-law, who was talking with someone, darted over immediately. "What do you think you're doing sitting down as a daughter-in-law? Stand up." Incredibly, she kicked my injured left foot. Losing my balance, I fell hard to the ground. I let out a soft cry, writhing in pain. I had just had the cast removed, so there was no protection, and I felt the pain directly. Looking down at me, the mother-in-law quickly said to the others, "I apologize for the scene. My lack of discipline has caused this embarrassing display. She should at least fake it better, right? After her own carelessness got her injured, she only knows how to play for sympathy." Mother-in-law may have been panicking inwardly at my fall, spewing nonsense rapidly. A few nearby people offered to help me up, but she stopped them all. "It's all right, no need to be kind to a liar. I'll give her a piece of my mind, so don't you worry about it." Mother-in-law grabbed my arm, trying to force me up while swiftly taking her own seat. I was sitting on the cushion. Being treated like a mere doll by my mother-in-law and the glances from the surrounding people made me feel embarrassed and irritated. I took a deep breath, ready to express the feelings I'd been holding back. But suddenly, someone approached from behind, brushed past me, and touched the back of my mother-in-law. "Oh, big mother-in-law!" The startled voice of my mother-in-law. Judging by her words, it must be my husband's grandmother. The woman was elegant in a pale-colored dress, but her tight-lipped expression gave off a cold vibe. "I heard you weren't coming today." "Well, I did say I might not be able to make it because I had plans, but I made a reservation just in case I could." "What, shouldn't I have come?" "No! It's not like you shouldn't have come. I'm delighted." My mother-in-law suddenly looked timid and scared. The big mother-in-law told my father-in-law, "Go ahead and start," and led my mother-in-law to a corner of the room. When I tried to stand up, the big mother-in-law stopped me. "You've got that leg injury, right? It's not good to strain yourself. Just relax and sit next to Ken." Her commanding presence was undeniable, so I just complied. As the big mother-in-law was about to return to her seat, my mother-in-law, standing in the corner, spoke up. Big mother-in-law." "What is it? You should just stand there. If you have something to say it from there." Without even looking back, the big mother-in-law sharply responded. "Why do I have to stand? I came because I wanted to dine with you." Peeks from other relatives made my mother-in-law's face turn even redder. What a ridiculous thing to say. Did you really think you, being just the daughter-in-law, can sit? It's about what you said to Jennifer earlier, isn't it? Don't you think you should set an example? Faced with the big mother-in-law's firm response, my mother-in-law's face turned even brighter red. Soft chuckles could be heard from somewhere. You used to be such a sweet girl when I first met you. When did you become so mean? If I knew you were like this, I wouldn't have let my son marry into your family. Well, my son did run away from home because he didn't like me, so I can't say much. My father-in-law, seated in front of me, shifted uncomfortably. Turns out, the silly reason my father-in-law married into the family wasn't because of a lack of heirs or any special reason, but seemingly to escape his strict mother. And the big mother-in-law just wouldn't stop talking. Everyone had stopped eating and was listening intently. I was shocked when he ran away from home, only to come back casually with a wife and son. You'd think they've done a remarkable job raising their child, but here they are, both of them, pretending not to notice their daughter-in-law being mistreated right in front of them. From the daughter-in-law's perspective, she must feel she's married into quite the family, huh? Why don't you two show everyone those dumbfounded faces of yours? Big mother-in-law pointed at father-in-law and Ken, who were seated, making them stand next to mother-in-law. These folks are a disgrace, being rude to relatives who've come from outside. Remember them well. I felt she might be overdoing it, but seeing the three of them, heads down, made me feel better. All eyes were on them when mother-in-law spoke up again. Big mother-in-law. I've been trying to educate this failure of a daughter-in-law. She barely does her chores, using her foot injury as an excuse, and even puts on a show of pain in public. My husband and son listen to me, but the daughter-in-law's defiance disrupts the household order. While accusing others of putting on a show, mother-in-law pretended to wipe tears with her sleeve, leaving me speechless. Big mother-in-law, who had been silent, sighed deeply and said, "Even if Jennifer were a worthless daughter-in-law, aren't you just as bad for kicking her in front of not only relatives but also guests? You oppress your husband and son, and use violence against a daughter-in-law just because she doesn't obey? You're like a frog in a well, thinking it knows everything." Mother-in-law finally fell silent at big mother-in-law's stern, yet not overly emotional voice. The trio, including mother-in-law, stood in the corner for a good hour. In the end, big mother-in-law let them eat because it'd be a waste of food to leave it. After the meal, I stopped big mother-in-law to express my deepest gratitude. While she still had a stern look, she advised, "Don't hesitate to cut off anyone who treats you poorly." Yet, her gaze seemed gentler than before. When I got home, my in-laws and Ken were already waiting at the front door. "I bet you haven't been able to clean the yard since you've been out all day. Please take care of weeding, trimming the bushes, watering the flowers, and sweeping the porch now. After that, we'd like a massage, so hurry back when you're done." Perhaps to vent the embarrassment caused by my big mother-in-law, my mother-in-law piled on more chores than usual. Father-in-law and Ken were silent, but their stares were clearly malicious. They blocked my way, not letting me step inside the house, so I sighed. "Oh, so you always get treated like this, huh?" Peeking out from behind me was big mother-in-law. Actually, big mother-in-law had asked me to come here. Seeing her, the three stiffened up even more. Noticing the large bags big mother-in-law was carrying, their expressions grew more tense. "Mom, you came all this way even though you're busy?" For the first time in a while, father-in-law spoke up, only to be glared at by big mother-in-law. "You guys are the ones piling on unnecessary work even though you know she's busy. From what I've seen, it seems like a little trouble wouldn't make you reflect on your actions." Big mother-in-law said this and handed one bag each to father-in-law and Ken. Yes, upset with their behavior at today's dinner, big mother-in-law had decided to move in for a while to discipline the three. During this time, she advised me to go back to my parents' house and even said that if things didn't improve, it might be best to consider divorce. We're about to start a fun living together. I'm so excited that I ended up bringing a lot of stuff. To make Jennifer turn her attention back to Ken and for you two to remember the love you once had, I'm gonna guide you wholeheartedly. The first time I saw big mother-in-law's smile, it seemed to have a mysterious charm that was both unsettling yet comforting. The next day, I contacted my parents and decided to take a short trip back to my childhood home. Ken tried to take advantage of this and snatched my phone, insisting he'd come with me. Before I could stop him, my dad shouted over the phone, "If you're the kind of man who stands by while my daughter is mistreated, she's better off without you. Don't show your face again." Ken ended up feeling down once again. After neglecting me for so long, I was stunned to see Ken shamelessly trying to lean on my parents. Whatever affection I had left for him vanished completely. Knowing full well how fiery his mother-in-law's temperament was, it seemed like Ken agreed to live with her because he was scared of refusing. He put me in the firing line, hoping to escape her wrath. Father-in-law probably has a similar nature. He too would remain silent, even when Ken was being chastised. I hope from now on, all three will be educated by the much scarier big mother-in-law and become more decent human beings. However, ever since then, while I've been relaxing at my childhood home, I receive calls almost daily. Most of the time, it's mother-in-law, but occasionally it's father-in-law or Ken. "Can you ask big mother-in-law to leave?" In short, he says this over and over again without hesitation. With me gone, all three are being thoroughly trained in household chores by big mother-in-law, and they tell me they're sore all over every day. On top of the physical exhaustion, they can't take out their frustrations on a daughter-in-law, so the atmosphere at home is constantly tense. It's not just big mother-in-law. Apparently, she's been calling over relatives unannounced for surprise inspections. The three of them are made to entertain the guests, spending their days in a state of constant tension. All three kept playing the victim, saying things like "kick out the big mother-in-law and come back. Why are we going through this?" So, I declared our divorce over the phone. Normally, it's something to be discussed face to face, but given how they treated me poorly, I figured I wasn't in the wrong to do it this way. With the mediation of the big mother-in-law, the divorce process was completed smoothly. I continued to stay at my childhood home, searched for a job, and decided to start a new life. Half a year later, a minor incident occurred at my workplace. Shockingly, my ex-husband, along with my in-laws, had tracked down my workplace and showed up unannounced. I wondered where the leak had come from, but then I got a call from big mother-in-law. She told me the letter Jennifer sent was opened without permission. Maybe that's how they found out. I calmed down the apologetic big mother-in-law and assured her that there was no harm done. At the entrance of my company, 3 of them were restrained by multiple security guards. Watching quietly from the floor above, I noticed they were repeatedly mentioning my name. They probably couldn't stand the scolding from big mother-in-law any longer. But mother-in-law used to curse me with foul words every day, and both father-in-law and Ken turned a blind eye, so it's no surprise they're in this situation now. I don't feel the slightest sympathy for them being manhandled by the security, and I don't want them in my sight anymore. Besides, I already had someone special in my life. This person respects my feelings, but also confidently shares his own opinions. He's someone I can really rely on. To be honest, I'm not yet brave enough to think about marriage, but I'm gonna take it slow and nurture our love. I'm marrying the president's daughter's lover. You're no longer needed. On the phone, Charles spoke with a triumphant tone. I could almost see his malicious grin. I've finally started to catch a break. Staying with you, I'd be stuck as a regular employee forever, but now I'm gonna strive to be the next president, he said, laughing. It was as if he was implying that not being able to climb the career ladder was my fault. Charles had this weakness in his character. He tended to blame others when things went wrong. I used to be able to forgive that. Back when I still loved him, but not anymore. My patience has run out. I can't forgive Charles anymore. I have to take action to make Charles realize his mistakes. My name is Sarah. I just turned 40 a few days ago. I married Charles when I was 25, and we both worked together. I quit my job when our first son was born, but after giving birth to our second son, I started working part-time at a nearby supermarket. Living on Charles's income alone was a bit tight. Our sons are both enthusiastic about their studies and sports, and I'm excited about their future. But Charles was indifferent even to them. To be precise, he had little interest in his family. Naturally, he barely spoke to me either, just the necessary greetings every day, and we hadn't had a real conversation in years. There's a parent-teacher conference at our younger son, Tim's school. I had pressed Charles about it. Let's go see it together on that day. I got it. We were both supposed to take a day off to attend the conference. But on the night before, Charles suddenly said this. Going to a parent-teacher conference, it's already more than enough if one parent shows up. I think I'll pass. What are you suddenly talking about? Tim is looking forward to having both of us come. Why would he say something like this out of the blue? Despite my reproachful gaze, Charles calmly said, I'm busy. Don't lump me together with the part-time old ladies. Who are you calling an old lady? Who? I snapped back at him half-jokingly, but I was hurt inside. I'm almost 40, and for the past 15 years since we got married, we've mostly been working together. Because of that, we've grown apart, and a rift has formed between Charles and me. I knew that, which is why I invited Charles to the parent-teacher conference, hoping to communicate through Tim and reconnect with him. But Charles just coldly said, If you don't want to be treated like an old lady, then maybe you should care a bit more about your looks. I'm fine being an old lady. I stuck my tongue out at him. Charles left, and I let out a sigh when I was alone. But I take a look in the mirror. There was a middle-aged woman with a slender waist reflected back at me. In addition to my part-time job, until last year, I had also been taking care of my mother-in-law. Her dementia was getting worse, and she started wandering around at night. I had many sleepless nights because of my mother-in-law. Mom sleeps during the day, so she doesn't require much attention. But at night, she walks around all night long. Being bedridden would be worse, right? Mom wants to get some exercise too. Charles fell back asleep without a care, even though he was talking about his own mother. I was the only one burdened with the hardship. As I aged, it became tougher to balance my part-time job and caregiving, so I had to put my mother-in-law in a nursing home, though it broke my heart. Please, come visit me from time to time, she said with a look of anxiety. I do bring my sons to visit her as much as possible. But Charles has never visited his grandmother. I also attended Tim's parent-teacher conference alone. Charles came home later than usual. I could tell he had been out drinking with his colleagues from the smell. My eldest son, Mark, was acting sneaky. Following his brother's lead, Tim also started behaving more distant towards me. Both of them are entering that difficult age. Despite thinking I shouldn't interfere too much, I couldn't help but worry. I decided to confront the two of them. Come on, tell me the truth. What are you guys hiding? Actually, Mark exchanged glances with Tim before finally giving in and speaking. Your birthday is coming up soon, right? So we decided to pool our allowances together and buy a cake. What? I was wide-eyed. I glanced at the calendar. Come to think of it, my birthday is just 3 days away. To be honest, turning 40 isn't something I'm particularly thrilled about. Yet, I found myself smiling, overjoyed by my son's feelings. On my birthday, true to their promise, the boys brought home a cake. Mom, we even tried to decorate the room for you, Mark said proudly. The decorations were clumsy, but the entire room was adorned with origami decorations. I was filled with happiness. Until Charles comes back. What the hell is this? As soon as he entered the room, Charles flew into a rage. I'm exhausted, you know. Can't I get some rest at home? What is all this? These ridiculous decorations. But today is Mom's birthday and a birthday at her age? Must be nice. With that, Charles tore off the decorations that were on the nearby wall and threw them in the trash. Clean this up right now. And bring me a beer. Hey! What do you think you're doing to these kids' feelings? I raised my voice. This was just too much. My heart ached as I watched my sons start to clean up, disheartened. What? Sure, I'm 40 and a grown woman, right? I'm not exactly at the age to be getting excited about birthdays. But I was happy to see my sons care. What if they were celebrating your birthday? I'd be disgusted just thinking about it. Charles twisted his face disdainfully for all to see. And after complaining about the slowness of the cleanup, he continued. I don't want you guys taking up my time. Just leave me alone. That's a terrible thing to say, I muttered, looking down. My sons were on the verge of tears as they cleaned up the decorations. That's when Charles noticed the cake on the table. I'll consider this a bonus for my hard work today. Mark and Tim were wide-eyed. In front of all of us, stunned, Charles grabbed the cake with his hands and shoved it into his mouth. Tim started crying. Mark was rubbing his back. His eyes were also filled with tears. What are you doing? You should go on a diet, you know. You shouldn't be eating this kind of stuff. Charles said, smirking. And just like that, Charles had ruined my birthday and the boys' efforts. For all his talk about work, Charles's income was far from high. In fact, there were no signs of promotion in sight, and he was rumored among his colleagues to be incompetent at work. When he was drunk, the complaints would come out. Kate would really listen to me at times like this, Charles said, holding a can of beer in his hand. I was taken aback. Who is Kate? Listening carefully, it seemed that Charles was quite close to a woman named Kate, a junior at his company, who was fond of him. He rambled on about how wonderful Kate was, fueled by the alcohol. Unlike you, she's pretty, honest, and cute. How far have you gone with her? I wish I could marry Kate. Then I could leave this damn house. Charles twisted his face bitterly. I was at a loss for words. Even though he was drunk, I never thought he would confess his desire to cheat right to my face. The next day, Charles looked guilty. He seemed to vaguely remember praising Kate to the skies while he was drunk. I'm heading out. Have a good time with Kate, I said. Charles glared at me in silence and went off to work. At this point, I was convinced of Charles's affair. But even so, I found it hard to take the final step to divorce. What would the boys think? I suddenly recalled the ruined birthday party. Since then, the boys had kept their distance from Charles. He was originally indifferent to family, so there was a distance between him and his sons. However, due to this recent incident, his sons completely closed off their hearts. Yet, Charles is still their father. I wondered, is it really okay to cut ties with him that easily? I was troubled. Then, I realized that my worries were in vain. On my way home after my part-time job, I received a call from Charles. He got straight to the point. I'm marrying a mistress, who is the daughter of a company president. I don't need you anymore. I couldn't comprehend the situation for a moment. My thoughts were frozen. How sudden and absurd is that? But Charles continued to speak as if this was an undeniable fact. I've finally struck it lucky. If I stayed with you, I would remain a regular employee forever, but now I'm going to work hard as the next company president. Kate is the boss's daughter? I was surprised again. It was clear that Charles was having an affair with Kate. But I never imagined that Kate was a woman of such high status. To put it bluntly, Charles is average in both income and looks, and he's approaching middle age. I thought he was out of his league with the daughter of a boss. Kate? Well, yeah. You've been obsessed with Kate lately, haven't you? Yeah, I guess so. There was Kate, wasn't there? Charles spoke in a strange way, as if implying he had other mistresses. Anyway, please break up with me, Sarah. Okay. Goodbye, then. I was astounded at how easily I agreed to the breakup. It's not that I was letting Charles have his way. Quite the opposite, I couldn't forgive him. As a first step, I decided to distance myself from him. I knew my sons would understand. When Charles came home with the divorce papers, I signed my name without hesitation. He tried to push the custody of our sons onto me, which I had anticipated, so I wasn't surprised. When I explained the situation to my sons, they responded with, figures. Dad never really cared about us, did he? Don't get desperate. I'm here for you, I assured them. That's our line. Mark said, looking out for me. Mom, don't be sad about the divorce. Mark and I are here for you. That's right, Mom. Thank you, both of you. I was moved to tears by my son's words. A month had passed since the divorce from Charles. My life hadn't changed much. I sent my sons to school, took care of household chores, and worked my part-time job. Then, on my way home from work, Charles called me again. He was in a complete panic. Help me! It's Kate! What happened with Kate? I asked leisurely. Mark's making curry for dinner and waiting for me at home today. I can't wait and am really looking forward to it. While thinking about this, I just want to get home as soon as possible. Kate came to my house, and now my wife knows about the affair. That's tough. I responded in a calm manner. I had expected this to happen sooner or later. Concerned about Charles's behavior, Mark and I had followed him and found out the truth. Charles's so-called mistress whom he wanted to marry wasn't Kate. Kate was just a junior at his company and came from an ordinary family. She was young and beautiful, which probably tempted Charles to cheat. However, his actual mistress, the supposed boss's daughter, was in her late 30s and not particularly attractive. How did Kate find out? I did it. I said it as if it was nothing. What? I told Kate the truth. I even sent her pictures as proof. Charles raised his voice at my words. What have you done to me? Thanks to you, my wife is furious and I've been kicked out of the house. I've even lost my job. It's because you deceived that president's daughter, isn't it? That's why this is happening. Charles was speaking as if he was the victim, but he was actually at the center of the problem. I sighed. How many years have you been deceiving Kate and your current wife? Shut up, it's none of your business. Well, it's true now, since we're divorced, I said with a bitter smile. But you were cheating on me while we were married, weren't you? What do you think of me and our sons? Just a nuisance. Marrying you was a mistake. What's wrong with trying to fix a mistake? Charles replied like a spoiled child. He is just a perpetual child, never admitting his faults. But even if he doesn't admit it, others won't let his faults slide. I've lost my job and home, and I don't even know if I'll be able to find another job. My wife talked to her dad, the president, and it seems he's pressured other companies not to hire me. And this is my problem how? I said to Charles, who was speaking so seriously. He was dumbfounded. Besides, I'm not your wife anymore. Let's each take care of our own issues. With that, I hung up the phone. There were several more calls, but I didn't answer. Instead, I got a call from Kate. Charles came to my house. He said he wanted to start over. That's really? I said, utterly astounded. I'm sure Kate on the other end of the phone had a similar expression. Of course, I turned him down and told him never to come back. That's the right decision. I nodded in agreement. After venting her frustration about Charles, Kate's voice softened. I didn't know that Charles was married. I know. All of us were deceived. All of us were victims, and there was no reason for us to hate each other. I'm sorry. It's okay. Don't worry about it. I ended the call with a bitter smile. I also got a call from Charles's current wife. She was emotional, expressing her frustration about separating from Charles and how she was deceived. Her strong voice made me think that Charles really deceived the wrong person. I received a call saying my mother-in-law was feeling unwell, so I went to the facility. The staff looked troubled. We've contacted her son, but he just insists handle it at the facility. So you contacted me? Yes, we know you are divorced, but there's no one else we could talk to. I see. I couldn't bring myself to hate my mother-in-law even though I divorced Charles. She was a solid person before dementia set in, teaching me how to cook. My sons were also close to her. I'm coming in. As I entered the room, I heard a moaning sound. My mother-in-law was trying to sit up in the bed at the back of the room. "Don't push yourself. Weren't you divorced from my son?" she asked with an anxious voice. I nodded and approached her bed. "Yes, but you are still my son's grandmother. And the facility contacted me, saying you weren't feeling well." "It's just a cold. And I'm already feeling better," she said, then coughed softly. The cold hadn't gone away. The staff told me Charles was even reluctant to pay for the facility, preventing them from taking my mother-in-law to the hospital. "I'll pay, so let's get you to the hospital. But please get better quickly and play with my sons again," I said with a smile. My mother-in-law seemed taken aback. "Okay." After confirming her nod, I left the room and arranged things with the staff. A few days later, I visited my mother-in-law again. And surprisingly, Charles was there too. However, the content of their conversation was terrible. "Mom, I just need a little. Can you lend me some money? Why do you only show up when you're in trouble? Don't be mad." Charles continued to speak in a soft voice, seemingly unaware that I was standing at the entrance of the room. "Mom, you must have some of Dad's inheritance left, right? Give it to me. Don't talk nonsense." His mother snapped back sharply, her anger seemingly overcoming her illness and giving her a moment of clarity. "The money is for the grandchildren. They'll need it if they're gonna go to college. And I also want to give some to Sarah, who has been very kind to me. That woman is a stranger to us now. Even if she's a stranger, she's kinder than you are." His mother retorted firmly. "The inheritance will go to the grandchildren. You won't get a penny from it." "Mom." Charles's voice took on a pleading tone. But it was in vain. When his mother noticed me, she smiled warmly. "Please take care of the grandchildren, Sarah." "Yes, ma'am." I nodded solemnly. Charles was still trying to press his case, but he was escorted out of the room by a concerned staff member who sensed that something was amiss. I later learned that his mother, anticipating that her illness would soon leave her incapacitated, had consulted with a lawyer through the facility to ensure her wishes were followed. Charles had been persistent in his visits, but in the end, his mother's resolve did not waver. When Tim came home from school, he exclaimed in a voice close to a scream, "Dad came to my school today and said he wanted to live with me all of a sudden." Given his previous indifference, it was hard to believe he had suddenly started to feel lonely. Besides, Tim was set to inherit from his grandmother. It seemed likely that Charles was trying to take him away in the hope of getting his hands on the inheritance. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yeah, I ran away. Something's definitely not right. Dad wouldn't want to live with me." Tim was unaware that he was the chosen heir to the inheritance. But he still sensed that something was off about his father's sudden appearance. He might go to Mark's place too. "That's a possibility," I replied, hastily getting ready to go pick up Mark. "Stay at home, Tim. Don't open the door for anyone." "Got it." I left Tim nodding in agreement and rushed out on my bike. I found Mark confronting Charles midway on his way home from school. Both of them wearing stern expressions. "Just go away. I don't want anything to do with you anymore." "Don't say things like that, come on," Charles pleaded, reaching out his hand to Mark. But Mark turned and ran away. "Hey, stop. Help, please. There's a strange man here," Mark called out, effectively labeling his biological father as a strange man. It was harsh. But given Charles's past behavior, it was not entirely unjustifiable. Mark noticed me and latched onto my arm, saying, "Mom, get rid of him, please." "Charles, that's enough," I said, stepping in between them to protect Mark. Charles glared at me, grinding his teeth. "This doesn't concern you. Let me talk to Mark. Mark is my son," I declared. I had been the one to raise him from birth. Charles hadn't even held him as a baby. While he was out enjoying his weekends, I was at home, overwhelmed with childcare. And now he wanted to talk? Most likely, he wanted to convince Mark to renounce his inheritance so the money would come to him instead. "Mark, go call for help," I instructed. "Okay." Mark nodded and ran off. And as Charles tried to follow, I warned him. "If you continue to bother my family, I'll have to call the cops." "What did you say?" Charles was red in the face, looking like a demon. "You've ruined my future," he said. "Well, you had it coming," was the response. The current state of Charles was the result of him lying to 3 women, including myself. However, Charles couldn't understand that. Incapable of admitting his own faults, Charles remained immature, with no progress or growth in his life. "Over here," shouted Mark, returning with a few men. Suddenly, Charles turned timid. He tried to run away but was surrounded by the men. Charles was then taken to the police station. He was labeled as a stalker and was prohibited from approaching or interfering with us. Nevertheless, just to be safe, arrangements were made for the school teacher to drive my sons home. I apologize for my ex-husband causing trouble. "No, the hard part is on Mark and the boys," said the teacher. "Charles still calls, even now. But none of us in the family pay him any mind. With support from those around us, we've successfully pushed Charles out of our daily lives." Choosing a holiday, my sons and I visited my mother-in-law. She was dozing off, but when Tim ran up to her, she showed a smile. "Thank you for coming." "Tim, Mark. It's been a while, Grandma." Mark started a cheerful conversation with my mother-in-law. According to the caregiver, her condition is slowly worsening. Eventually, she might forget about all of us. I hope to create as many memories as possible with my sons before that happens. After spending a good amount of time with her, it was time to leave. Walking down the hallway of the facility, my sons seemed restless. "Mom, can I talk to you for a sec?" "What is it?" Tim hesitantly took my hand. And Mark took the other. "Hey, no fair, Tim." "I want to as well," Mark chimed in. "What's going on with you two?" I was feeling ticklish inside. Come to think of it, when the boys were little, we often walked together holding hands like this. "It's fine once in a while," I said. "Yeah, it is." They agreed, and we all started laughing and walked on. Looking back, it's been a long journey of housework, raising children, and eventually caregiving, while also working part-time jobs for 15 years. The end result was bitter. Charles had betrayed me and left. But still, I can smile. Because of my sons, I am not alone. We've cultivated a bond that allows us to laugh together like this. I will never let go of this bond, I thought, smiling to myself. I'm going to leave the house to my parents. If you oppose that, we're getting a divorce. What in the world is this guy talking about? While I am drowning in sorrow after losing my mother, Dan comes up to me with a smirk on his face and drops this bomb. And then, I realize that I've lost all affection for him. Instead, a surge of anger towards Dan and my in-laws started to well up inside me. "Fine, but you're gonna regret it." "Shut up, idiot." He hands me the filled-out divorce papers with a stupid grin on his face, not taking my words seriously at all. If that's the way he wants it, I'm more than ready to show him just how serious I am. I won't let him get away with underestimating me like this. Grinning maliciously, I take the divorce papers and leave the house. Where to? My uncle's place. The next day, accompanied by my uncle, I made my way to the mansion now occupied by my in-laws' family. "Where were you yesterday? You can't just up and leave when you're the housekeeper." "Housekeeper? Who are you talking about?" "Who else but you, the wife?" "I already got a divorce, though." Dan is stunned into silence by my words. At this point, my uncle steps forward. "There's something I need to discuss with you as a lawyer in light of recent events." My name is Emma Thompson. I'm a 35-year-old working housewife. I don't have a father. He apparently passed away in an accident when I was very young. As a result, my mother had to raise me all by herself. My mother, a skilled businesswoman, built a huge corporation from scratch all on her own. to make sure you never struggled because of money, especially since we were a single-parent family. I want you to live a long and happy life, Emma, for both me and your father." That's what she always used to say as she worked tirelessly. Thanks to her, we never had to worry about money. "Hey Emma, big sis, I was in the neighborhood for work and thought I'd drop by." "Oh, that's tough, working even on your day off." "Yeah, it is what it is." "Oh, by the way, where's that heavy package you were talking about the other day? I can help you with that while I'm here." And my uncle, her brother, would also help us out during his busy schedule, so we never really had to struggle. But the rule in our house was always to take care of your own business. You work for what you want. "Mom, can I get a part-time job? There's something I want to buy." "Sure, I don't mind. What do you want to buy, though?" "A book for a certification I want to get in the future." "Oh, Emma, you really are such a good girl." So I never shied away from putting in the effort. And my mother always praised me for it. And as a result, today I hold a managerial position at my company. I fell for you at first sight, Emma. And watching you never stop trying just made me fall for you even more. I met my husband, Dan, at work. He approached me proactively, and I eventually fell for his enthusiasm, leading us to get married. We don't have any children, but we've been living a normal life together. One day, I had to work overtime because a meeting dragged on, and I came home late. "I'm finally home. I'm starving, hurry up and get the food ready." When I got home, Dan was just lounging on the sofa, fiddling with his smartphone, not even greeting me with a welcome back. I couldn't help but sigh at the sight of him. "I told you I'd be home late today, so go ahead and eat first, didn't I?" "Oh, did you?" "I definitely told you, and you even replied that you understood." "Whatever, just hurry up and get the food ready." Dan continued to lie on the sofa, saying this. Unlike me, he doesn't hold any position at work. He's what you'd call a perennial employee. I always tell him that I want him to do more housework because of this, but he never lifts a finger. He leaves his clothes on the floor where he took them off and doesn't even try to clear away his plates after eating. When we first got married, he used to care about me and actively help with the chores. "You know, I've just come back from work and I'm tired. You, on the other hand, have the luxury of lying on the sofa, so at least get your own food ready." "Stop nagging. As if you could have kids." At those words, I snapped. It's true that we don't have children. But it's not entirely my fault. Both of us have bodies that make it difficult to have children.
That's the same for you as well.
It's your fault. We can't have kids because your body is defective. Despite this, Dan always blames it all on me. Perhaps he feels his pride is hurt because I have a position at work and he's not progressing in his career at all. In other words, he's just jealous and taking it out on me.
That has nothing to do with this. If I'm defective for working and doing house chores, what does that make you? Who does neither?
What did you say? Are you mocking me? That day, we ended up fighting. Feeling sulky, Dan went to bed without eating anything. I was left holding my head, unable to understand his actions. I've worked so hard, and yet. I muttered to myself while warming up some pre-made side dishes. The next morning, it was a rare day off with nothing to do, so I got up later than usual. Dan's not here, huh? He's usually sleeping till noon. He's probably gone to his parents' house or something. Thinking that, I got ready and headed to the hospital. Mom, I'm here.
Oh, Emma. Are you off today?
Yeah. How are you feeling?
Same as always.
My mother had collapsed at work the other day and is currently in the hospital. Knowing her, she probably felt unwell before she collapsed, but ignored it and continued working until her body couldn't take it anymore. Even now, she must be feeling unwell, but she's working from her hospital bed.
What about you? How are you doing?
I'm fine, really. I replied with a smile to my mother, who was asking with a worried look. I can't give her any more to worry about.
You know, the row of the trees in front of the office was beautiful again this year. Want to see the pictures I took?
Yeah, I'd like to see them. With that thought, I changed the subject. Then, I had a pleasant chat with my mom and left the hospital after a while.
Oh, it's from my mother-in-law.
Checking my phone, I noticed a message from my mother-in-law. Honestly, I didn't feel like calling her back, but then she started calling me. Reluctantly, I answered.
Where the heck have you been? I was visiting my mom at the hospital. What? You left Dan alone to prioritize your own parent?
Her shouting over the phone made me grimace. As expected, Dan seemed to be at his parents' house. His mother was complaining about it.
You're always putting so much on Dan. A wife should prioritize her husband. Just because you have a position doesn't mean you can get cocky. And you can't even have children.
I wish she'd let her grown son live his own life. Dan always hides behind his parents. It's really pitiful. With those thoughts, I brushed her off and hung up.
What's wrong, Emma?
You look upset.
Oh, hi, Uncle.
Are you here to visit Mom too? Something like that. Then, from somewhere, my uncle called out to me. There was a man standing behind him. Is he your colleague? Yeah, he might be related to your work in the future. Let me introduce you. Bob Smith. Nice to meet you. He handed me his business card, and I gave him mine in return. Afterwards, my uncle told Bob to go ahead into the hospital because he had something to discuss with me.
So, who was on the phone?
Yeah, my mother-in-law. I explained the situation with a wry smile. Dan, who doesn't do house chores and runs to his parents' house whenever we have an argument. His mother, who defends him and insults me for being infertile. After hearing my story, my uncle looked troubled.
I'd rather you didn't tell Mom about this. I don't want her to worry anymore.
All right. My uncle nodded, looking concerned. I thanked him and we parted ways. Not long after, something happened.
Wait, Mom is...
By the time I rushed back to the hospital, my mother had passed away. Stunned by the sudden farewell, I just couldn't catch up and was left in a daze. Unable to think of anything, my uncle firmly supported me and took care of the funeral arrangements.
All right. With this, the inheritance is all ours.
Really, she was the CEO of a major corporation, wasn't she?
I wonder how many millions are in the inheritance. The wife's inheritance belongs to the husband's family after all. We can finally say goodbye to that shabby house.
What snapped me back to reality was such an insensitive conversation. Dan and his parents were laughing during the funeral.
Get out!
Unable to believe their remarks, I froze, but my uncle kicked them out in my stead. Dan and his family tried to resist, but realizing the surrounding people were glaring at them, they left the funeral venue, hurling insults at my uncle.
Emma, if you ever want to cut ties with them, just let me know.
Yeah, thank you. After that incident, I didn't want to go back to the house where Dan was. So, I decided to temporarily live in the mansion, which was part of my mother's inheritance. This house was meticulously designed by my mother, filled with numerous memories. I planted flowers in the garden to soothe my busy mother, and we played hide and seek in this vast mansion on holidays. Even though she should have been busy with work, my mother always made time for me. Spending time in this mansion brings back those days.
If I'm gone, you can do whatever you want with this house.
My mother had said that to me when she was alive, and now I'm thinking maybe I should just. Just as I was pondering this, the doorbell rang. Maybe my uncle came to check on me, worried. Since he used to drop by unannounced when I was a kid, saying he was in the neighborhood for work, I opened the front door without thinking. Knew you'd be here. Dan. And.
Wow, what a fabulous house. Hey, wait a minute.
There stood Dan and his parents. Surprised by the unexpected visitors, they barged into the mansion. Moreover, they brought moving boxes with them, one after another.
What are you doing in my mother's house?
Your mother is gone, isn't she?
This is my house now.
No, you're wrong. This house is in my parents' name. My mind went blank at those words. My parents? But it's my mother's inheritance, Why would it belong to Dan's parents?
Got a legal assistant friend to change the ownership for us. What? How dare you do such a thing without asking?
Shut it.
A wife's belongings belong to the husband's family.
But hey, relax. We'll keep you as our maid. Saying that, Dan grinned.
The house will be given to my parents.
If you oppose this, we're getting a divorce. What on earth is he talking about? Dan, speaking with a smile while I'm drowning in sorrow from losing my only mother. At that moment, I realized my love for him had vanished. In its place, anger towards Dan and his parents welled up inside me.
Fine, but you'll regret it. Shut up, you idiot.
Not taking my words seriously, he handed me a pre-filled divorce form, smirking. If he's serious, I'll show him I'm serious too. I'll make him regret looking down on me. Grinning, I took the divorce papers and left the house. My destination? My uncle's place.
What the? They've really crossed the line this time.
I immediately consulted my uncle, who is a lawyer. Changing ownership without consent is illegal, and normally impossible. Yet they had a legal assistant do such a thing.
Don't worry. I'll protect my sister's house. And of course, I'll protect you, Emma.
My uncle assured me with those words. And we immediately set out to take action. The sadness of losing my mother had completely turned into anger towards those outrageous people. I won't forgive that unreasonable family. The next day, I went to the mansion occupied by Dan's family with my uncle.
Where were you yesterday? A maid can't just leave on her own accord.
Maid? Who are you talking about? Who else? You, the wife. We're divorced, though? Dan froze at my words. Taking that as a cue, my uncle began to speak.
I have something to discuss as a lawyer regarding this matter.
He looked at Dan coldly. By the way, I immediately filled out my part of the divorce papers handed to me yesterday and submitted them. Including that, as I reported, Dan seemed to be in a daze, probably not understanding the situation. He probably doesn't get what's happening here. Hey, what's all this ruckus? Just then, my in-laws popped in, probably having caught wind of the disturbance. That's when my uncle stepped in and clarified that I am the rightful owner of this house, stating firmly that any unauthorized changes to the ownership would be downright illegal.
What are you talking about? We've got a legal clerk handling all the necessary paperwork.
And just who might that be? You do realize this is a clear-cut case of forgery, right? Leaving my in-laws to my uncle, I turned my full attention to Dan, who was glaring at me, realization dawning in his eyes.
Don't you dare pull any unilateral moves.
Oh really?
And who was it that decided to go off and do things on their own first?
I haven't done anything illegal, at least. Dan was left speechless by my retort. It's almost laughable how easily he was silenced. I guess that explains why he's never made it far in life.
You're infertile and yet. You always bring that up so quickly, but to be quite frank, you're not in a position to talk.
Yes, I do have difficulties getting pregnant. However, there is still a chance for me if I seek treatment. Dan, on the other hand, has been told outright that having children is out of the question for him, even with medical intervention.
I might still have a shot at having kids. You, however, are completely out of luck when it comes to holding your own child. That's just. I'll never forgive you for belittling the cherished memories I have with my mother.
Dan bowed his head in defeat. And it seemed like my uncle had successfully shut my in-laws up. Pack your things and leave here immediately.
And be prepared for what's coming next.
Under our icy glares, their faces turned pale. They will regret trashing the house filled with memories of my mother and me, a house they dared enter with their shoes on.
My sister had realized that you were going through a hard time.
It turns out my mother had noticed something was amiss and had asked my uncle to look out for me, anticipating that I wouldn't want to burden her with my troubles.
She knew I'd keep quiet, not wanting to cause her any stress. So she asked you to help me in her stead.
That's what I heard from my uncle. Further investigation revealed that Dan and his family had been bragging about their plans to swindle my inheritance the moment my mother passed away. To prevent this, my mother had drawn up a will, entrusting everything to me. She had left the will with Bob, a friend introduced by my uncle.
Right here, it states that all of her estate is to be left to her daughter, Emma. And she made it clear that she can do as she pleases with this mansion.
It was clearly written in the will that had been entrusted to Bob. Dan's face turned ashen as he heard this, and he started to cling to me desperately.
Please, Emma, I'm begging you. I've already sold our house, and my parents' house is gone too.
What? Why on earth would you do something like that without thinking it through?
It
came out that Dan had racked up a significant amount of debt behind my back. And all of it was from spending lavishly at nightclubs. He had taken advantage of my busy schedule to frequent these clubs, throwing money at the hostesses night after night. To pay off his debts, he had sold off both our house and his parents' house.
Well, that's your problem, not mine. Emma, but you're my wife, aren't you?
I was your wife. Now, you've got two choices. Either face the consequences of forgery or buy back the mansion for $3 million.
There's no way I can.
Selling the houses had just barely allowed Dan to settle his debts. There was no way he could come up with $3 million. His parents were in the same boat. Watching him squirm, I decided to file a police report. And as I kicked the in-laws out and took stock of the mansion, I noticed several things missing.
Some of my keepsakes are gone.
What's the meaning of this?
That wasn't me. My mom said she wanted to sell the stuff she didn't like.
So, it turned out my in-laws had taken the liberty of selling things themselves. Looks like I've got more grounds to sue them. In the end, Dan and his family were left saddled with a massive amount of debt. And I made sure he was properly ousted from the company. After all, I'm the president now, having taken over from my mother.
Bring me that idiot wife.
In such a situation, the father-in-law stormed into the company. He then went on a rampage, demanding that the damage report be withdrawn and money be handed over, which ultimately led to the police taking care of him as well. What a hopeless parent and child, my uncle and I would say with a bitter smile.
So it seems we've figured out who that notorious legal clerk really is.
Turns out, that legal clerk was apparently a cousin of Dan's. He manipulated the situation to make me look like a villain, grabbed a hold of my weaknesses to force me into cooperating. Because of this incident, this cousin has been cut off from his path as a legal clerk, holds a grudge against our in-laws, and has been spreading rumors in the family saying I was deceived. They are demons, leading to our in-laws' isolation. So, I've heard it's quite a quagmire now.
Man, that family on the other side seems like they've got some crazy blood running through them. Seems like it.
Well, they can just drag each other down for all I care. I have no sympathy for them whatsoever, so that's what I thought.
So, have you decided what to do with that mansion?
Yeah. I've decided to sell it. Indeed, that mansion is filled with memories of my mother. However, it's been tarnished by my in-laws. Plus, that mansion is too big for one person to live in.
If Emma has decided that, then do as you please. I'm on your side.
My uncle said, showing his support for my decision. And so, I sold the mansion. Luckily, a wealthy individual looking to spend their remaining years in peace quickly bought it. I said my goodbyes to the memories with my mother and left the mansion behind. From now on, I'll be living alone in an apartment closer to my workplace.
Emma!
Oh, Bob. I heard from the senior, and I came here. I was approached by Bob right after leaving the office. I owed a lot to him for investigating Dan's family and helping me gather evidence. Would you have some time to spare for me? Sure, I don't mind, and with that, we entered a cafe near the office. Thank you for everything, including what you did about my mother.
No. I just wanted to be there for you, Emma.
Saying that, Bob looked at me earnestly. Surprised, I still looked back at him. I like you, Emma.
What? I know things just settled with Dan, and you might not feel the same way right now. But please think about it when things have calmed down.
Saying that, Bob gave me his personal contact information. Honestly, I had noticed his actions. But until now, I wasn't able to see him in that way. "I'm serious about this," he said, his face turning bright red. At this moment, I found him endearing. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad to get married again, I thought to myself. Sometime later, my in-laws apparently tried to take back the mansion by breaking into it. Perhaps they thought I was still there. However, it was already owned by the wealthy family. Thanks to the various security measures they had in place, Dan and his family were quickly dealt with by the authorities. With their previous criminal record, they were handed a prison sentence.
"Please, Emma. Help me."
I had forgotten to block his number, and just like that, I got a message from Dan. What an idiot. It seems like the in-laws were the only ones who broke in, and Dan managed to avoid trouble by asking around for help. However, he still has debts too heavy for one person to bear.
"Can't you learn your lesson already? There's no way I'm going to help you." "What? We were married once, weren't we?" "Really, I'm just disappointed in myself for not having enough discernment when it comes to you. I've realized I shouldn't be swayed by you.
I need to be more careful from now on." "Well, I don't think I need to worry about that anymore."
Is that all you wanted to talk about? Emma, give me another chance to. I'm going to have to pass. Goodbye."
With that, I hung up the phone. This time, I made sure to block his number properly.
"Is the call over?"
"Yes, it's over now. I decided to start dating Bob. We are now engaged." My uncle encouraged me, saying, "This guy is all about sincerity."
"Bob, I have a hard time getting pregnant, and I'm not young anymore. All I need is you. Besides, family isn't just about blood ties."
I genuinely felt that I could build a happy family with him. Then, I talked to my uncle about Dan, Bob, and having children.
"That's great. If that's what you both have decided, then I'm happy for you."
"I've always wondered, why do you support me so much, Uncle?"
"Well, it's a promise I made to your father."
According to my uncle, he and my father were best friends. He told me that my father always used to say, "If anything ever happens to me, please take care of my wife and Emma."
"And to be on your side."
"I see.
"Besides, you're like a daughter to me,"
he said with a smile, and I smiled back. I was really glad that he was on my side.
"Be happy."
"Yes, of course." I made a firm promise to my uncle that I would be happy this time. I can't make him worry about me anymore. After that, I married Bob. We enjoyed our life together for a while before deciding to adopt a child. This kid is my grandchild. My uncle also cherished the child. I poured as much love into the child as my mother had into me.
"Because it's our child, we'll be fine no matter what." "Yes, we will."
There may be many trials awaiting us in the future, but I believe we can overcome them. I decided to teach the lessons my mother taught me to my child, to be an ally like my uncle, and to convey honest feelings like Bob. That was my vow. My husband, John, who had a liver transplant, was discharged from the hospital before I was and cheerfully said this to me.
"You know, I married you because I thought you were someone who would do everything on her own."
John started the conversation like this and clearly stated,
"I can't handle caregiving, so let's get a divorce."
I wonder, how can this man, who once abandoned me, have the audacity to leave such a tearful message on the answering machine? Is he stupid or what? You're going to ask the person you pushed away to pay alimony? What is he even thinking? I couldn't help but laugh out loud. "You can use my name. No, please do use it, that would be better. Could you please write everything you can? My name is Sarah Thompson. What I'm about to tell you happened 3 years ago when I was 37. Back then, my name was Sarah Johnson. I was married to my husband, John, who was my senior at the publishing company where I worked. In addition to my main job, I spent my days writing comics as a hobby and a side job. The stuff I wrote wasn't incredibly amazing, but it wasn't bad enough to get cancelled. I leisurely wrote one heartwarming 4-panel comic a month by myself. I originally joined the publishing company because I wanted to work in a field related to what I loved. However, being a creator and working in editing or sales were different things. I gradually became tired of my job. That was when John, a senior from a different department whom I was dating, proposed to me. What I wanted from him was not just to be a wife, but also to manage the house. "I can totally support you on my own," he said. And indeed, he could. John, who wrote articles on politics both domestically and internationally, gradually started writing about Japan as well. Eventually, he went freelance. His sharp insights during late-night political debates and his frank manner of speaking became popular on social media, and he started getting invited to various TV shows. He also launched his own political commentary YouTube channel and gained a steady fan base. I watched his growing reputation from the sidelines while I took care of the housework. I drew my comics on a tablet, mostly alone. After getting married, even my parents and in-laws who used to ask about children eventually stopped bringing it up. In fact, during family gatherings, my in-laws would apologize to me, saying they felt sorry that their son was putting everything on my shoulders. We didn't have children. We just couldn't. It would be a lie to say I wasn't sad about it. When I first got married, I wanted to have children with him and build a bright, happy family. However, his lifestyle was just too different from mine. Coming from a fairly wealthy family, John was a hard worker and a partygoer. To him, I was the perfect wife who kept the house and didn't talk back. I knew what I was getting into when I married him. Running away from my previous situation played a part in my decision to get married, but can you really call it a marriage when, despite not being on a work assignment or separated, he only comes home once or twice a week? While I wrote my cheerful comics, I occasionally found my own creations unbearable. However, something seemed off about John when he came back home one day. He looked terribly fatigued right from the moment he woke up, and he had no appetite. "I've been busy lately, and I've been out drinking with the crew and guests from the video shoots. I've been thinking about this for a while, but don't you think you've been drinking more than before?" "I can't help it, it's socializing. But building relationships is the most important part of my job right now." When he put it that way, I couldn't say anything back, especially since I used to be in that industry. And the part that I disliked about my previous job was precisely this. But as a wife, I couldn't just stand by and watch him increase his drinking. Every time I saw John, I reminded him to be careful about it. Then, each time, he would retort, "What do you know about my job?" I was caught in a cycle of not being able to say anything in response. And after a few years of these daily exchanges, something finally went wrong with John's health. That happened just 3 years ago. He genuinely fell ill, collapsed at work, and was taken directly to the hospital, where the doctor told him the following words: "It's cirrhosis."
What?
John immediately reacted. Meanwhile, I, being called as a family member, was strangely calm. I felt a mix of resignation and a kind of I knew it feeling. "According to the questionnaire, you've been drinking quite a lot. It seems like you've had alcoholic liver disease for a while now. Why didn't you come to the hospital sooner?"
"I've been busy with work."
"But at this rate," the doctor said with a sigh, "Mr. Thompson, you don't have much time left." We, being a family of wordsmiths, immediately understood what that meant.
"Doctor, what should I do then? I still have so much work left to do."
"Doctor, this man is..." "Oh, I've seen you often on TV. You seem to be a very busy person." "That's right, so I want to get better as soon as possible. There's the option to be hospitalized and take time to recover, but I don't have time for that. My work is..." "But with your current condition, you need surgery."
"Surgery?"
"Liver transplant. You should have come to the hospital sooner," the doctor said with a sigh. And then, we were told that there are 2 options. Either receive a liver from a deceased donor, or get a living donor liver transplant from a close match. Once he was moved to a private room for his hospital stay, John took my hand, looked me straight in the eyes, and said,
"Please, give me part of your liver."
I was taken aback. I had anticipated that he might ask this of me. Waiting for a liver from a deceased donor would take too long for him. I hesitated for a bit, but then said,
"If I'm a match."
"Oh, thank God. Thank you. You really are the best wife," he said, hugging me. I couldn't remember the last time he had done that. That's how much we had lost touch with each other. Maybe I still had a sliver of hope that this would make him turn his attention back to me. The tests showed that my liver was fit for transplant. Hearing the news, my in-laws blamed John for his unhealthy lifestyle and shed tears of gratitude for my offer.
"I'm really sorry, Sarah. It's all because of this guy's unhealthy lifestyle that we've caused you trouble. No, if this had happened when I wanted kids, I might have said no. But now, I guess it was meant to be."
John, who was listening from behind, was pouting and texting someone on his phone. I was admitted to the same hospital room for tests and surgery, and fortunately, the surgery was successful. John's prognosis was good. On the other hand, mine was not. In living donor transplants, there's a small risk of complications for the donor. I didn't think it would happen to me before the surgery, but I was too optimistic. I ended up being one of the unfortunate few. John was discharged from the hospital before me and returned to work right away. He even used his condition and the transplant as material for his job. I spent my days in bed watching his videos, and there was one thing that puzzled me. John, with a big smile on his face, said he was grateful to the liver donor. However, he never once mentioned that the transplant was a living donation from his wife.
What's up with that guy? Exactly, he should have mentioned Sarah in a situation like this.
My in-laws understood as they watched the video together.
It's okay, I couldn't do much even when I lived with him, and I couldn't have kids. It's not about that.
My mother-in-law was especially angry on my behalf.
Anyway, has he even visited you in the hospital since he was discharged? He hasn't, right?
My in-laws were grateful, but having them get angry on my behalf every single time was exhausting. Besides, he's paying for the hospital bills. It was a long hospital stay, and my mother came from far away to be with me, which made me feel guilty.
That's true, but you are a married couple, so he should be doing that.
Watching my mother and in-laws argue for my sake was really hard, but it wasn't something I could simply dismiss. While enduring my poor condition, all I could do was distract myself with my tablet every day. I never thought I'd be so grateful to be someone who usually draws on a tablet alone. I even shared about my hospitalization on my social media account as a manga artist. Words from unknown fans made me incredibly happy. Nevertheless, my recovery was slow, and I was told I needed a second transplant. On a certain day, waiting for that surgery, a visitor came while I was constantly feeling weak all over my body. At that moment, my mother was out, and I was alone.
"Hey, long time no see." "You?" "Yeah, I'm feeling better than before thanks to your liver."
"Really? So, you don't drink alcohol now?"
"Yeah, openly saying that. No one even invites me for drinks."
"That's good." I was furious inside, listening to John speaking cheerfully. Whose fault did he think this was? But at that time, I didn't have the energy to express my anger.
"So, why do you think I came here today?"
"What?"
"I married you because I wanted someone to take care of the house properly."
I inadvertently sat up. "You can't do that right now, can you?"
"What are you talking about?" "I mean, I married you because you were someone who could do everything on her own. It even helped me escape from my parents' pressure to get married. And it was a good thing we didn't have kids."
"I wanted them, you know." I had wanted kids. I really did. We had even talked about it.
"That's why I'm here today."
"What?" "Well," he began, speaking clearly,
"I can't handle caregiving or anything like that.
So, let's get divorced." That was what John told me 3 years ago. Now, I've returned to my maiden name, Johnson, living alone in an apartment, and I've started working on my manga again. I was working on a draft for my series that day, when suddenly my phone rang. It was John. I ignored it. After about 20 rings, the call ended. But 10 minutes later, it started ringing again. I didn't want to hear his voice anymore, so I set my phone to send him straight to voicemail with a message asking him to leave a message. Then he said, "Please, pick up the phone. I'm in deep trouble right now and I need your help. You're making good money these days, aren't you? We used to be close, remember? Please, I'm begging you. Actually, my wife." At that point, I could feel the anger that I had felt back then beginning to burn inside me again. I reached out to someone through the messaging tool on my tablet.
"Oh, what's wrong, Sarah?"
"Thank you for asking. Mr. Smith, I've been receiving strange calls from my ex-husband, John."
"That sounds serious. I'll be right there."
Mr. Smith is someone I know from the publishing company that published one of my books. John served me with divorce papers out of the blue, and feeling shocked and devoid of energy, I ended up signing them. "I'll give you your share of our assets, so use that to pay the hospital bills," he said. By that point, our shared assets had been significantly reduced due to hospital and surgery costs. In other words, even after paying all that, John just wanted to get rid of me. Honestly, at that time, I didn't even care about going through a second surgery anymore. But when I posted on social media that I was scared about the surgery, I got a lot more responses than I had expected. "Please don't talk like that, please hang in there and go through with the surgery, we'll wait forever for you to resume your series." Those words made me so happy that I drew a short comic about my situation and posted it. And then, I got more responses. Maybe if I keep writing about my current situation, everyone will be happy. That's what I thought. Since then, I've been drawing comics about my health condition, upcoming treatments, and my feelings as much as possible every day. Initially, I just added explanations to single drawings and posted them in series. Gradually, not only did the responses increase, but I also started to enjoy the drawing itself. I began to create comics in a 4-panel format, turning myself and my doctor into characters and depicting my situation in a comical way. I continued to do this before and after the surgery. And it went viral. Even when I was still in pain after the surgery, when I asked for my tablet or smartphone, my mother would give it to me, albeit with a resigned look on her face. She knew that it would make me smile. This viral moment on social media led to a book deal from a publishing house. Mr. Smith was the person in charge at that time. "The drawings are pretty rough, is that really okay?" I was worried about that. The series I had been working on was a solo project, but I had always made sure to produce high-quality work. However, the things I posted on social media were more like rough sketches.
"That's what's so good about it."
"Really?"
"Yes. It's proof that you were in a state where you could only draw rough sketches, but then you found hope and gradually started to pull yourself together."
"I see," I thought. In the end, the diary of my illness published as a book became an unusual hit, being the first popular comic on social media in my career. The second surgery went well, and the record of my recovery was published as a sequel. Given the content, I started receiving a lot of media interviews, and suddenly I, the artist, became famous. And now, I live alone in this apartment, bought with the royalties from those books. The book even sold well in its paperback edition, and thanks to that, I have no financial worries in my current life. I'm busy enough dealing with tax reduction strategies.
However, this is quite a terrible situation.
Mr. Smith commented as he arrived and we went through the content of the relentless calls from John.
"I knew he had remarried a much younger woman, but I didn't know it was this bad."
After the divorce, I heard from my in-laws that John had remarried a woman 20 years his junior. Her name is Natalie, and from what I gathered, she had been dating John even before our divorce. Initially, she was a hostess and a customer relationship with John, who met her through work, turned serious. Natalie, for her part, thought that if she could snag John, who was doing well financially at the time, it didn't matter that he was somewhat older, she could take the wife's seat from me.
That's why he started coming home less and less. "It's a good thing we broke up, really."
But then John's liver gave out, and he needed a transplant. That's where I came in. After a liver transplant, it becomes difficult for a woman to get pregnant. I had already given up on having children, making me the perfect candidate. Maybe he wanted to have children with Natalie. So, he delayed bringing up divorce until the right moment. Then he took advantage of my vulnerable state to make me sign the divorce papers. At that time, I hadn't realized that John was having an affair. So he was able to settle everything just with the division of assets.
But he just confessed by himself,
Mr. Smith said, laughing heartily.
Seems like he forgot that you can still demand alimony for infidelity even after you've found out about it. Didn't you?
If he had known, I don't think he would be coming to me for money, I replied. Speaking of which, this request for money was indeed a turning point for me, turning misfortune into success. Natalie saw me on TV, got really fired up, and said, "What the hell, his ex-wife is." It seemed like at first, she was thrilled about snatching away a cool husband from a nerdy and introverted woman. But before she knew it, she realized that I, the person she looked down upon, was on TV, basking in the limelight. She apparently couldn't stand it. That's when she started dabbling in forex trading. Got a taste of beginner's luck, and ended up getting completely hooked. By the time she realized it, she had accumulated a significant amount of debt and was covering it up with loans from payday lenders, all behind John's back. Things had gotten out of control.
So, I'm begging you. You've got quite a lot of money now, right? Come on, for old time's sake, can you help me out? He pleaded.
I burst into laughter. Are you out of your mind? Asking for money from me, whom you spared paying alimony to, with what face are you even asking that? I laughed loudly. Mr. Smith. Yes? I don't mind, actually, please use my name. Better yet, please write about it extensively. After that conversation, the torrent of angry calls from John ceased for a while. I was back to my quiet days of writing at home. Then one morning, while having breakfast, my old smartphone rang. Of course, I didn't pick it up. This phone had already served its purpose for daily use. Ever since John started his attacks, I had switched my main phone. Work communications and other necessary contacts were manageable via emails on my tablet and other means. From the voicemail of the now unused smartphone, John's voice echoed, "Sarah, it was you, wasn't it?" I just smirked and turned on the TV, catching the morning talk show just in time. They were featuring a scoop from a weekly magazine that hit the stands today, and it included this piece. It read, "Popular commentator John Thompson actually abandoned his wife, a donor for a living body transplant, to marry his mistress." That's how the story began. And of course, it was clearly stated that I was John's ex-wife. Oh my, who would have thought that the artist behind that sensational comic was his wife? I was really moved by that comic. And to think she was treated so terribly. The guests on the show were all chiming in with their 2 cents. Meanwhile, John's voicemail kept screaming,
"It's all your fault. I've been disowned by my own family because of you."
Well, that was expected. I had asked Mr. Smith, the magazine's editor-in-chief who is now in that position, to make this story big enough even for John's parents, who usually don't read such magazines, to understand by featuring it on the morning talk show. Initially, Mr. Smith wanted to keep John out of the narrative in his works. He asked me if that was okay. And of course, I told him. Absolutely not. Please expose everything as much as possible. I have no intention of seeing that man again, and if possible, I'd like to crush him in a big way. And so he did, resulting in the article that came out today.
Because of you, my father told me that I won't be able to receive the inheritance that was supposed to come my way one day.
I don't know anything about it. I answered to the voice on the answering machine. Yes, I really don't know anything about it. After all, I only spoke the truth. The fact that my ex-husband had to be hospitalized and undergo surgery was not something I thought necessary to mention at the time. It wasn't particularly relevant to my comic. But now, things are different.
I've been dropped from the shows I had contracts with, and the plan for the book I was going to release has been scrapped. The number of subscribers to my channel is plummeting. What are you going to do about it?
That's why I'm telling you, I don't know anything about it.
I'll sue you. Who are you kidding? I have more grounds to sue you for our divorce reasons. And with that, I burst into laughter again, all by myself. Later on, John was disowned by his wealthy family. On top of that, he had to somehow repay the alimony and debts I demanded after our separation. It seems his new wife Natalie thought that with John's savings, they would manage somehow, even with some losses. But the truth was, John's work had always been like running in place. He wrote books and appeared on TV, earning a decent income. But on the other hand, the expenses for research trips for his books and production costs for his video channel were not negligible. In other words, his savings were in a constant cycle of increase and decrease. At the time of our divorce, his popularity surged as he made a comeback as a commentator after recovering from his illness. His viewership and subscriber numbers increased, and even after deducting medical expenses, he was making a good profit. But popularity is fickle, and the entertainment world is harsh. His reputation fell. As he left his overcoming illness narrative for another woman, especially when his new wife Natalie made foolish mistakes despite having an intellectual husband, he lost a significant portion of his female fan base. Nevertheless, he still had to pay off his debts. John ended up selling his condominium to repay them. Afterward, the two of them moved to a cheaper apartment, but their days were filled with endless arguments.
It's your fault for not managing the house properly. That's why we couldn't sell it for a higher price.
You were the one who said I could do whatever I wanted, were the kinds of conversations they had. And then, his work opportunities drastically decreased. Realizing he needed to do something big to turn things around, John made a major decision. With just a simple set of equipment for video streaming, he set off for conflict zones around the world. He aimed to make a comeback with live broadcasts from the field. I was genuinely surprised when I heard about it from the lawyer who was in touch with John regarding the alimony. On the other hand, Natalie tried desperately to stop John's reckless action, but eventually, she gave up and returned to the nightlife. It seems that the debts Natalie had made could not be repaid just by selling John's condominium. Even the lawyer lost track of their whereabouts after that. As for me, since John's actions were exposed in a magazine, my name became well known again, resulting in the decision to reprint my comic books. It seems that the perception of the same book can change depending on the situation. Thanks to that, I've received a bit of unexpected income on my end. However, it hasn't really changed my own lifestyle much. I'm not completely healed physically, so I'm taking things at a slow pace, working on my comics while keeping my interactions with the media to a minimum. My ex-in-laws still show me affection, almost as a replacement for their estranged son. Even though my mother and I sometimes argue when she visits, we generally get along well. Now, my mother occasionally goes on trips with my father and ex-in-laws, just the four of them. Mr. Smith is a bit of a different story. Since he went out of his way to help me with this whole ordeal, we've started to occasionally meet for tea or meals. Since I'm not in the best of health, we avoid drinking. My parents and ex-in-laws have asked if there's any chance of us getting married, but to be honest, I've had enough of marriage. Mr. Smith isn't interested in marriage either, so being just friends, with a bit of distance between us, feels comfortable. When I told this to the four of them, they seemed to have mixed feelings of disappointment and relief. From now on, I just want to live my life at my own pace, without being swayed by anyone else. Nice and easy, at my own pace.
Can you guys give up your living space for me? It's really cramped with 3 kids, you know?
Out of the blue, my sister-in-law showed up at our 2-family home, where my husband and I were living with his parents, bringing her kids along. Both my husband and I were dumbfounded by my sister-in-law's outrageous demand. Lost for words, we were even more shocked when my in-laws took her side.
The space you guys are living in is too big for just the 2 of you, isn't it? It's only right as human beings to give it up for this girl and her 3 growing kids. You 2 would be just fine in a storage room.
I couldn't take their selfishness anymore. I was at the end of my rope. I needed to bring down divine retribution on them for their selfishness. Determined internally, I responded with a blank expression on my face.
All right. As you wish,
my husband and I will leave this place."
With that, I took my husband's hand, and we moved out of the two-family home to a modest apartment. A few days after moving, I received a call from my sister-in-law on my smartphone, and instinctively answered. What pierced my ears was the desperate shouting of my sister-in-law.
"What is this all about? I just got a notice to vacate from the real estate agency. You know something about this, don't you? What did you do?"
And that was my revenge against them, who had taken over our home. My name is Emily. I'm a remote worker in my 30s, living with my husband, Michael. We met through a blind date. I had been a remote worker for a long time before getting married, and not having many opportunities to meet men, my worried parents set up the blind date without telling me. Initially, I was confused and thought it was none of their business, but the man I met was surprisingly pleasant. We hit it off as we found common topics to talk about, and that led to dating and eventually marriage. The man who became my husband is somewhat timid, but he's a kind person and very reliable. For someone like me, often described as assertive yet inflexible, he has a lot of qualities that I lack. Life with him was going smoothly. His parents lived in the next town over. We weren't living together, but we had a good relationship, occasionally staying in touch and being invited to their house. A few years into our marriage, my mother-in-law started suggesting that we live together.
"We're getting on in years, and when I think about the future, I get anxious. Hey, if it's not too much trouble, would you like to live together?"
She said it lightly, without pressuring us, but the in-laws started bringing up the topic of living together more frequently. I understood their concerns about living alone at an old age, and thought living with them might be a good idea since we had a good relationship. However, my husband seemed to have some reservations.
"Michael, are you against living with your parents?"
No, I think it should be fine." His indecisive attitude was typical, so I didn't think much of it. Little did I know that this would lead to such a catastrophe. One day, while living a peaceful life, tragedy struck. My parents were involved in a car accident and passed away suddenly. The suddenness of it all left me in a daze. Being an only child, with no close cousins or relatives to rely on, I had no time to grieve as I had to arrange the funeral and deal with other matters. My grandparents had already passed away, so I inherited all of my parents' assets, including a significant amount of money, as well as their house and land. However, I couldn't bring myself to be happy about it due to the grief of losing my parents and the busyness of handling their affairs. My kind husband supported me through it all, staying by my side. And my in-laws also empathized with me, as I couldn't easily express my feelings.
"Emily, it's okay to cry when you're sad. You suddenly lost your parents, and it's natural to be sad. There's a lot to do, I know, but you need to accept your feelings first."
Hearing my mother-in-law say this made me realize that I hadn't cried since my parents passed away. And finally, I was able to cry my heart out. After my parents' funeral and settling the inheritance matters, my in-laws started to visit our house more frequently and bring us gifts.
"If it bothers you, feel free to tell us, okay?"
My mother-in-law said this with a wry smile, but I felt truly saved by the presence of my caring in-laws. Gradually, I came to think of them almost like my own parents. Then one day, as usual, while having tea and chatting at our house, my mother-in-law brought up the topic of living together again after a long time.
"Hey, about living together, even though you have Michael, you must feel lonely without your parents, Emily. Would you seriously consider living with us? We really want to live with you and Michael. Of course, it's fine if you want to wait until you're ready, but could you start thinking seriously about it?"
Their earnest proposal warmed my heart. After they left, I consulted with my husband who had just returned from work.
"Your parents suggested living together again. I have to deal with my parents' house anyway, and I was thinking that maybe it's a good opportunity to start living together in a new house built for us all. What do you think, Michael?" "Well, yeah, I'm sure it will be fine. Let's do it."
My husband seemed a bit concerned about something, but in the end, he accepted my wish. From there, we conveyed our willingness to live together to my in-laws and started preparations for it. The house I inherited from my parents was old and had concerns regarding earthquake resistance, so we decided to demolish it and build a new duplex for us to live together with my in-laws on the same land. It cost a considerable amount to demolish the old house and build the new one, but fortunately, we were able to cover the costs with the inheritance left by my parents. A few months later, a new duplex registered in my name was completed. My in-laws liked the new house, and I felt relieved and started our new life living together with a fresh mind. At first, living together with my in-laws went smoothly. However, gradually, I started to feel a coldness in their attitude toward us.
Hey Emily, don't vacuum at such a late hour. It's incredibly noisy. You're home all day, you can clean any time. You need to be more considerate of us in your daily life.
At first, it was mostly comments about our different living rhythms and noise, but gradually, they started to make more and more critical remarks about household chores.
It was nice of you to invite us to dinner, but this food, it's quite plain, isn't it? Could you make something more extravagant next time? Are you lacking in hospitality? I wonder what kind of education your parents gave you.
Their cold words pierced through my heart. However, I thought it was due to my own immaturity. They must be scolding me for my own good. I decided to bear it and accept their harsh words. Even so, their sudden change from being kind and warm to this cold attitude gradually started to bring me down. When I vented to my husband, it seemed like he had an idea what was going on.
So that's what's happening. No, Emily, it's not your fault. You're doing your best managing the house while working, and you're the ideal wife for me. So, don't let anything they say bother you, okay?
My husband's smile and kind words healed my wounded heart a bit. However, he also seemed to find it difficult to speak up or go against his parents, so the fundamental issues remained unresolved. Gradually, the mistreatment from my in-laws escalated from words and attitudes to financial matters. They stopped contributing to the living expenses and utility bills that we used to split.
You and Michael are both working, so you have money. It's outrageous for you to ask us, who are living on our pensions, to pay. Don't you think it's cruel? When did you become such unfilial child?
With such accusations thrown at us, we had no choice but to bear the financial burden for my in-laws as well. Then one day, a shocking incident occurred.
My husband cheated on me, so I divorced him. So let us live here with you.
My sister-in-law barged into our house saying this, bringing her 3 young children with her. My husband and I were perplexed, but my in-laws welcomed them with open arms.
This is your home too, there's no way we'd refuse. We're actually thrilled to live with our grandchildren. That husband of yours was terrible for cheating. You must be exhausted. Come in and rest first. Yay, thank you. Excuse us for intruding.
Despite living under the same roof, my husband and I weren't even asked when my in-laws decided to happily invite my sisters-in-law and their kids to stay. If it were just a short visit, that'd be one thing, but to move them in without asking us. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. Feeling uneasy, I cautiously approached my mother-in-law to talk. This sudden decision to live together with my sister-in-law and her kids, it's a bit. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law looked like she took it as me being against living with my sister-in-law. Glaring at me with a stern look, she retorted in a cold voice.
What? Are you saying she should be left to wander the streets after her husband left her? Even with her young kids? I can't believe how cold-hearted you can be. Are you even human?
She spat out these words. Panicking, I tried to explain myself, but she was having none of it. No, that's not what I meant. If we are going to live together, I wish you would have asked for our consent.
What's the difference? You just don't want to live with them, that's clear. Besides, they are going to live in our part of the house, so we don't need your agreement. Just mind your own business.
Saying that, she firmly shut the door leading to my in-laws' living space, leaving me standing there utterly flabbergasted. I was left feeling stunned by the irrational behavior and justifications of my sister-in-law and in-laws. Living with my sister-in-law and her kids, which started so abruptly, was frankly a nightmare. Her kids would freely enter our living space, running around, making noise, and sometimes breaking things. They didn't listen no matter how many times we told them not to come into our room, and my requests for my sister-in-law to scold them were bluntly dismissed.
What? Can you not interfere in my family's matters? And don't you dare scold my kids. It's not that I'm scolding them, I just want them to learn some basic manners, like not going into other people's living spaces carelessly, and not making noise in someone else's house. That's rich coming from you. Living in this house, thanks to Mom and Dad, and now acting all high and mighty.
With her face turning red with anger, she shut the door leading to my in-laws' space once again. It seems she has misunderstood that the house is owned by my in-laws, but I couldn't find the courage to correct her. In the end, nothing changed about the kids' behavior. They would barge into my workroom, disturbing my work, making both my professional and personal life chaotic. I was slowly losing my mind due to the daily commotion. Observing the kids, I noticed something. At first glance, they seemed well-dressed, but upon closer inspection, I saw their teeth were riddled with cavities, their nails were bitten down and rough. It was clear they weren't being properly taken care of. Together with their lack of manners, it was apparent that my sister-in-law wasn't taking proper care of them. And my in-laws, perhaps too soft on their grandchildren, didn't seem to be correcting them at all. Ever since my sister-in-law and her kids came, our lives have been turned upside down. I'm really at my limit. Exhausted, I opened up to my husband, who finally shared his long-standing concerns. It seems that my in-laws have always favored my sister-in-law, leaving my husband feeling neglected for a long time. However, my in-laws have a great public image, never letting anyone catch a glimpse of the discord within the family or their own unpleasant traits, always appearing as a happy family of four. After getting a job, my husband moved out and started living on his own, and that's when his parents' attitudes softened, showing more kindness and consideration. This kind demeanor extended to me after marrying him, leading us to believe they had turned over a new leaf. But since we started living together, my in-laws' attitude has been just like when I was a kid. While they dote on their daughter, they don't care about my husband at all. Instead, they look down on him and treat him coldly. This behavior and attitude became more pronounced around the time they accepted their daughter moving in, and my husband realized that his parents' true nature hadn't changed since his childhood. It seems that whether or not they're living with us determines how my parents behave outwardly. If we're not living together, they treat everyone nicely with a perfect facade, but their true colors show when we live under the same roof. I'm sorry for not realizing this sooner and making you go through such a hard time. My husband said, his eyes teeming with tears. Hearing this confession from my husband was a shock to me. I could never have imagined that the kind in-laws I knew before we moved in were just a facade, and that they had been looking down on me all along. I had started to suspect something from their recent attitudes, but hearing the truth made it all the more heartbreaking. However, my husband was a victim just like me, even though he kept silent about it. I couldn't bring myself to be angry at him.
Thank you for telling me. It's not your fault, Michael, so please don't apologize.
Understanding the true nature of my in-laws, I suddenly felt the inferiority I had towards them vanish. From then on, I secretly began preparing to leave and escape from my in-laws and sister-in-law whenever necessary. A few weeks later, on a holiday, as my husband and I were relaxing in the living room, my sister-in-law made an outrageous suggestion.
The place where Mom and Dad live is too cramped. We can't let the kids live freely there. So, how about you give us your living space? Wait, are you telling us to leave this house?
Stunned by my sister-in-law's absurd demand, both my husband and I were taken aback. My sister-in-law just snorted in derision.
Oh, even a fool like you gets it. That's right, I'm telling you to leave this house.
As I was at a loss for words, my mother-in-law appeared behind my sister-in-law.
The space you guys are living in is too big for just the two of you, isn't it? It's only natural as human beings to give it to this girl here, who has 3 growing kids, don't you think?
My mother-in-law said, smirking. I couldn't hold back any longer and argued back.
That's absurd. This is our home too. Where are you telling us to live? I don't care about that. Maybe you can live in a storage room? That would be perfect for just the two of you.
My mother-in-law said dismissively, while my sister-in-law eagerly agreed. I felt my patience snap at their audacity. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to mete out divine punishment to these women who did whatever they pleased. Determined in my heart, I responded with a neutral expression.
Fine, we'll leave. But we can't move out right away, so please give us a week. We'll be out of here just like you want in a week's time.
Saying that, I took Michael's hand and turned our backs to my in-laws and sister-in-law, who were squealing with delight. Once we were alone, Michael looked at me with a frustrated expression and apologized. Emily, I'm sorry. I couldn't say anything. Hearing him say that, I revealed my plan to him. It's okay, I've got everything planned out. Actually. Michael was surprised, but he agreed to my proposal. We then proceeded with our moving preparations, and a week later, we faced my in-laws for the last time.
As you wished, we're leaving this house. In return, we're cutting off all ties with you and your daughter, starting today.
My husband declared our decision to sever ties, but my in-laws didn't seem to care at all.
Good, be gone. You were a failure of a son to begin with, you're nothing to us. I feel so refreshed now that the nuisances are gone. This house is finally just for us.
Ignoring my triumphant in-laws, Michael and I left the two-family house we had lived in. We moved into a rental apartment we had arranged temporarily. Despite being small, it was a quiet space, and we started our peaceful life together, just the two of us. A few days after moving, I was working from home when I decided to take a break and checked my personal phone, only to notice a slew of missed calls from my in-laws and sister-in-law. Just as I was wondering what was happening, my sister-in-law called again. I answered without thinking, and her shouting voice pierced through my ears.
Hey, what's going on? I just got a message from the real estate agent saying we have to leave. Do you know something about this? What did you do?
Actually, ever since my husband opened up to me about his parents' true nature, I had been preparing to sell the house we lived in with them. I had secretly requested estimates from several real estate agents, selected one, and at the moment they announced they were kicking us out, I went through with the sale. Although the house was newly built and a two-family home, the assessment of the house itself was bargained down. However, the land was prime real estate, so we were able to get a decent amount for it. So, I was able to let go of the land and the two-family home that I inherited from my parents, and recoup a considerable amount of money.
That's outrageous. This house belongs to Mom and Dad, right? It's ridiculous that you could sell it on your own.
To my sister-in-law, who seemed to be under the mistaken impression that the house was in her parents' name, I told the truth.
No. This house was built under my name, so it was mine in both name and reality. I was only renting a part of the living space to your mother and father. Well, now it's someone else's house since I've sold it. What did you say?
It seemed like the conversation with my sister-in-law was on speakerphone, as I could hear her and my mother-in-law's astonished voices.
The house wasn't under Michael's name. We thought it was under his name, so it would naturally belong to us as his parents. You deceived us, you liar. When you said you were leaving the house, normally, you should have handed over the ownership to us. What an ungrateful, deceitful person.
My in-laws and sister-in-law were screaming and hurling abuse. To them, I retorted.
That's an awful thing to say. You all made your own assumptions. I just disposed of my own property. So please hurry up and leave.
With that, I hung up the phone, ignoring my still yelling sister-in-law and her family. The in-laws, having received an eviction notice from the real estate agent, had no choice but to comply and reluctantly vacated the new home. Rumor has it that, having nowhere to live, the in-laws and sister-in-law's family started living in an apartment. However, the children's pranks and noise were so bad that the neighbors constantly complained. Because of the numerous complaints and the severity of the pranks, the landlord couldn't stay silent, and it seems they were kicked out of the apartment in less than a month. Once again without a place to live, the desperate in-laws stormed into my husband's workplace.
Bring out Michael. We are his family, and we have something to talk to him about.
Realizing that this was no small matter, the receptionist at the company held my sister-in-law and her family back while discreetly contacting my husband. After receiving the call, my husband explained the situation to his boss, called the police, and had my in-laws and sister-in-law restrained by the police when they arrived. It was after the police arrived that my husband showed himself to his parents. Seeing my husband, my in-laws and sister-in-law, even while being taken away by the police, resisted fiercely and yelled at him.
You ungrateful brat! Because of you, we lost our home. Take responsibility. And calling the police, are you out of your mind? How could you treat your own family like this?
Facing his desperate parents and sister, my husband calmly declared,
I don't have parents or a sister. I used to have people who were my parents and sister, but I cut ties with them a few days ago. You and I are complete strangers now. I simply asked the police to handle the disturbance in our company's lobby. Is there a problem with that? What?
At my husband's words, my in-laws were left speechless. While my sister-in-law, until the very end, screamed, You traitor! You heartless man! However, she was eventually shoved into a police car and taken away. While my in-laws and sister-in-law were being interrogated, we met once with my sister-in-law's husband and his parents. From what we heard, it turned out that my sister-in-law was the one having an affair. Moreover, it was her husband who had asked for the divorce, and they weren't officially divorced yet. Considering the whole police situation, my sister-in-law's husband demanded a divorce again. Reluctantly, my sister-in-law agreed, and their divorce was finally finalized. After the divorce, the custody of the children went to my sister-in-law's ex-husband. My sister-in-law's ex-husband, after taking custody of the kids, seemed to have straightened them out with the help of his parents. I've heard they've become very well-behaved children now. After everything that happened, my in-laws and sister-in-law only received a stern warning and were released, and it appears they have started living in a run-down, cheap apartment. It turns out that while living with us, they had been spending lavishly on luxury items while making us pay for living expenses and utilities, which resulted in them having almost no savings left. My sister-in-law, unaware of this situation, was furious.
What the heck is this? I wasn't informed about any of this. I was counting on your money for alimony and living expenses. That's none of our business. You're the one who cheated and got a divorce. You should pay your own alimony. You've got no one to blame but yourself. You damn old hag.
Even my in-laws, who used to spoil my sister-in-law to no end, seemed to have run out of patience. Now they reportedly argue about money every day. It seems like my sister-in-law has long since lost contact with her affair partner, leaving her with no one to rely on. Out of necessity, she started working a part-time job. However, she seems to be causing a lot of trouble at her workplace, and it's only a matter of time before she gets fired. Despite all of this, my in-laws haven't managed to shake their habit of wasteful spending. They're scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck, with no hope of saving any money, and their financial situation is only getting worse. They're even close to being evicted from their apartment due to unpaid rent. Hearing about the downward spiral of my in-laws through the grapevine, my husband and I used the money from selling the land and two-family house to buy a small, cozy single-family home. Together with my sweet husband, I'm now living a peaceful and happy life every day.